Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Michael Cunningham Authors Backlist video, update number 2. I actually made another video, an Authors Backlist video for Michael Cunningham, way back in 2022, and I was in that video summarizing 3 of his other novels that I had recently read. And then time kept passing until the final 3 novels I had on my Michael Cunningham backlist made it to the top of my Goodreads TBR, where I couldn't ignore them anymore. That makes it all sound rather bleak, like I thought maybe I wouldn't like them, but actually I liked all 3 of these novels, which was certainly a trait, especially because with some of his more recent writing I'm a little more on the fence, but these 3 pretty much spoke to me. So Michael Cunningham is a contemporary writer, literary fiction writer living in America, who's written a large handful of novels and other writing as well. He rose to special prominence after the publication of his book The Hours, which was then turned into a movie starring the likes of Meryl Streep and Julianne Moore and Nicole Kidman. But in The Hours, it is a 3-tier storyline taking place in 3 different timelines. One of them is covering a sort of modern-day gay retelling of Clarissa Dalloway, which in modern day then was the turn of the 21st century. One of them covers a woman in the 1950s reading Mrs. Dalloway and the effect it has on her. And then one of them then moves to the 20s where Virginia Dalloway herself was writing Mrs. Dalloway. So that's that. But since then he's written more stories, although most of what I'll be reviewing here he wrote well before Mrs. Dalloway, although the first book actually is the one he wrote immediately after Mrs. Dalloway. Not Mrs. Dalloway, he didn't write Mrs. Dalloway, he wrote The Hours. Anyway, I've, started reading these books in last December, hoping to finish it all last December, but instead I've read 1 book a month. So now I'm finally at the end of my author's backlist project with Michael Cunningham, and I can summarize these last 3 books. So anyway, yeah, the first one I'll talk about is Specimen Days, which is the one he wrote most immediately after The Hours. And it has a similar conceit in several ways. It's another 3-tier story following various characters in 3 different timelines, and it also weaves in a author. This case, it's Walt Whitman, and Specimen Days comes from his Overture. And it's a little different too. First of all, these storylines start in the past but then move into the future. So it's another literary fiction writer who is slumming it in speculative fiction, which can be a real turnoff for me as someone who actually appreciates speculative fiction. Anyway, another thing about this book is that we basically are following the three similar characters named more or less the same thing in the 3 storylines, and they all kind of represent the same things. Like we have a young boy named Leo who's sort of a prophet who can kind of see into the future. We have a older but sort of young adult man named Simon who's kind of at the cusp of things, and then we have a woman named Kathleen or Catherine or something of that sort, and she's kind of just trying to hold things together in all of these stories. In the first story, which actually does take place during Walt Whitman's life, and he makes a brief cameo, we're looking into the rise of the Industrial Revolution, or the Industrial Revolution in America for immigrants at the 19th century. And it's narrated by the Leo character after his brother Simon is killed in a factory. And the way Leo understands it is as the machine eating Simon. And there we get to sort of the commentary, for which also Whitman got into, about sort of the power of nature, over all of this industrial stuff. And anyway, Leo then has visions, and he's able to save Catherine, who was Simon's fiancée, from a similar fate. Then we move into the contemporary storyline, which again in this book is the beginning of the 21st century. And Kat is our main character in this storyline. She is an African-American forensic psychologist working in New York, because all of these stories at least start in New York City. And her job basically is to take calls from, you know, the crazies, as it were, the people who want to report either other people or themselves doing dastardly deeds. I mean, and usually it's, you know, people who have some sort of paranoid fixation, so it's not based in reality. And she has to, a big part of her job is figuring out which of these leads is credible. And this becomes this particular problem when she gets this strange call from a child talking about a possible terror attack in the future, and she isn't able to kind of get a full sense of what's going on before the child freaks out and hangs up. But then there is this ghastly murder where a child kills an adult, and it's tied to a sort of elusive terrorist group. So the fear is, you know, this crime would happen again. And so she's on the case now to try to track down what's happening. And she is in a relationship with the Simon character, who's sort of this younger man, actually, who kind of like is sort of an escape for her. And then the Leo character is one of the young boys in this terrorist group, which is tied again to sort of an anti-industrial headspace where they want to return to the natural world. And there's like a hint in there that, you know, it seems crazy at this point, but that this terror group could actually have a huge impact on the future. And but anyway, what really spoke to me in this story was the character of Kat and her personal background and how it informed both her job and the current storyline for her. I thought it was really powerful. And then the third storyline, surprisingly, I didn't dislike. First of all, I guess I was really into Cunningham's writing by this point. And, you know, there's some, you know, maybe hand-wavy world building stuff where we go into the future where, in fact, that terror group did have a massive impact and was able to bring about more or less a post-apocalyptic future. We also have aliens and androids in this future, and none of the characters, or, well, maybe one of them is Leo is a prophetic human, as usual, but the Kathleen and Simon characters are not human. And Simon is the character who is narrating in this one, and he's, I think, you know, ultimately, you know, it's moving that he's looking for love and connection, and the other characters are basically looking to survive, and so there's a lot going on, but I was able to stay invested in this theme and in the character relationships here. But so I thought, you know, when you focus on the character stuff and a little less on, I guess, the commentary on naturalism and in the industrial age, I think it's the most interesting. And then I really do think the forensic psychologist Kat really popped out to me, and was just even if I could just read this book just for her, it was worth it. The next book I read goes back near to the beginning of Cunningham's novel writing career. This is Home at the End of the World, which was published in 1990 and in fact was also made into a movie, a much more indie, under the rug type of movie. But it does star the likes of young Colin Farrell and Dallas Wright, and they actually, funnily enough, come to narrate the audiobook for this, so that's pretty cool. So this is a book, it's much more straightforwardly literary, and we're returning again to more straightforwardly gay themes, no pun intended, but we are predominantly following these two young men starting when they were teenagers, growing up in the Midwest in you know, the 60s and 70s, and their names are Jonathan and Bobby. They both have some tragedies in their backstories, but those never really overtake the plot in a huge way, except it kind of makes them kind of enigmatic and looking for family and connection. Especially Bobby. Bobby is very enigmatic and really draws people to him, including another secondary character being Jonathan's mother, because Bobby more or less grows up in their household in a lot of ways. And his sort of be who you want to be no matter what attitude can be very enticing to a middle-aged housewife who feels like, you know, she's at dead ends otherwise. And then also with Jonathan, it's a sexual reawakening in a lot of ways because Bobby is his first boyfriend, and then Jonathan is much more established as a gay man going through the rest of the story. He moves to New York for college, and although he is in gay relationships, and we're getting into the 80s, his primary platonic relationship is with this older, 30s-year-old older woman, or mid-30s older woman named Claire. And they just sort of have this steady thing going together, and almost a fantasy that's never fully realized about actually having a family together, while on the side he's having his relationships. And so things are kind of going as normal until Bobby finds himself, at loose ends where he doesn't have a place really to live anymore in the Midwest. So he comes to New York to live with them, and like so many other people, Claire really kind of falls for him, although she is very much a predator and very kind of an icky character, I think. The most challenging character, I think, for me in this book is Claire. And so Bobby and Claire engage in a sexual relationship, which briefly tears apart the threesome, and then she does get pregnant, and that kind of brings them back together for a little while, but she's also a bit of a free spirit. Meanwhile, the AIDS crisis is raging. One of Jonathan's old lovers comes down with AIDS, and there's questions about whether or not Jonathan also has AIDS. It's never fully, confirmed, but it does seem like it could be possible. But Jonathan is kind of our main character in this, I think, or maybe it especially seems that way at the end of the book, where he has this beautiful, understated moment with Bobby and his former lover, where he realizes that, he can be content and happy with his life as it is. But it just made me really verklempt in the moment, and I was crying at work a little, listening to the audiobook, and I just thought this was a really moving character piece about a really very unconventional characters and sort of unconventional relationships with each other, but mostly, I think, rather wholesome or moving ones. And the final book I want to talk about, I believe, is Cunningham's very first novel, and it's almost as old as I am, from the 80s. This is Golden States. I have a feeling he's kind of pushing this under the rug, and it's just not as widely available or talked about anymore. Maybe as a sort of awkward first try novel, but overall I thought it was compelling, although kind of like the second novel. It had a similar theme that is uncomfortable, or I wonder if maybe it's more uncomfortable now. It has some sexual themes that are a little less acceptable now. I wonder how this book would have been received if it were written in a more contemporary style, but in fact, I think, at least as it was received in the 80s, the most questionable sexual parts were relatively accepted, at least by the cover copy of this book, which actually spoils a lot of the action. But anyway, this is very much a bildungsroman with a very young character, a 12-year-old, almost 13, but 12-year-old character named David, who is living with his family in Southern California, in Los Angeles. He has a very female family, and in large part because, well, his mother was married twice, and he's from the second marriage, and that man was abusive, and ultimately they divorced. And then she had she was widowed from a more well, I guess idealized marriage, or maybe she's idealizing it from earlier, and she has this much older child named Janet, who's about 23, and then David has a younger sister named Lizzie, who's about 10, and so Lizzie and David and the mother are living together, and Janet moves back in. She abruptly breaks off this engagement with this lawyer named Rob. She feels like he's going to keep her from following her dreams of becoming a doctor if she stays with him. Meanwhile, he's being very, I think, emotionally questionable, and even the novel, cottons in on that he is stalking her relentlessly, first through the phone and then driving down from San Francisco to try and win her back, and it's relatively uncomfortable. Also made that way, I guess, because David also doesn't really like the guy and wants Janet to stay and follow her dreams, and kind of has a fantasy almost about that, like in a way he feels like her knight in shining armor. And also, meanwhile, David is dealing with this strange situation at school. He has this best friend who, Billy, who is much more, I think, first of all, literally on the other side of the tracks, and also he's much more, he's a far less likable young man. He's prickly and a little bit violent, which kind of culminates in the fact that he and David, as usual, over the weekend go to the mall or whatever, and Billy wants to steal, and so he's stealing, and then he ultimately gets caught, and he and David are separated at the time, and then David's going to look for him, and then finds Billy basically being arrested and doesn't help him, so it seems like that's why Billy kind of turns on him. First, by the next time David comes to see him, he starts to mock shoot him several times, and then at school he starts to sort of, he's kind of psychologically intimidating, but also just physically beating up on him. And so David's feeling overwhelmed by that and not knowing what to do with that and not telling anyone about that either. So all of this is going on over the span of a week, and it ultimately culminates in Janet, being worn down by Rob and deciding to go back to San Francisco with him. And David has the idea that he can turn this into an adventure where he'd save Janet and he'd also reconcile things with Billy. The two of them could go hitchhike and get to San Francisco to save Janet. And so, of course, he tries to get Billy's attention to do this, and that doesn't work. But then he does go off on his own with barely enough money in his pocket to do anything. He is able to take a bus or two and hitchhike a few times. And the last hitchhiker who takes him in is this 30-year-old man named Warren. And Warren, first of all, because David's never fully honest with anyone about what's going on, partially because he's, trying to not, get sent back to his mother, but also I think he just is a confused preteen. But he gives away the idea that he is, in fact, a longtime runaway and young gay boy and a 14-year-old prostitute. And so that's how Warren understands this situation. And Warren then, starts feeding David a joint. And it does turn out that Warren lives in San Francisco by this time. They're pretty close. But he takes David home basically to start grooming him for a sexual encounter, which doesn't go really far, but the way that the back copy, and I guess David even understands it, is it's a sexual awakening, but it just still, in today's day and age, it is, I think, really icky that even being Warren stops, he's like, 12 is too young. I'm like, 14 is too young too, my dude. I'm not sure I'd even, maybe this is prudish, but I'd also think 18 is a little young for you as well. But anyway, I guess, there's something about that, it's a little bit squicky, like, this isn't about a sexual awakening. It's more, it's closer to pedophilia. That's what it feels like. But then again, to, take this book a little bit more on its own terms, for David, what this ultimately felt like was a sexual awakening. And I feel like, there were some signs, tales in here that, he could be a young gay boy, and not just because Cunningham was writing him. But actually, I think a lot of the things that this particular, maybe even more discomforting, is this particular road trip, which ends on a little bit of a violent note, because there's like a literal Chekhov's gun situation where his mother has a gun we see in the beginning, and he takes it with him as part of this fantasy. And so when he's ultimately, cowed by the police, they think, well, you took this gun to shoot your sister's boyfriend, didn't you? And he kind of goes with that. And he comes home, and it's almost like his mother and his sister are tiptoeing around him for the first time. And it's almost like his coming of age is also about embracing a sort of violent undertone. So that's a little discomforting as well. There's also a big motif with coyotes prowling around this time, and just sort of, it does feel like in this story, growing up into being a man is something that feels a bit dangerous, and he doesn't seem to have many good male role models at all. So there was something that was true to life for this, or you know, that I was compelled by the characters, and I read this really quickly. But it also was a bit sad and disquieting, just about how it feels like there's just a lot of danger in the world. Hopefully, ultimately, when David grows up a bit more, he could find, you know, more wholesome happiness with a partner, or with his family. But yeah, I did enjoy this, and also that, you know, there was a lot of, you know, sort of references to what it would be like growing up in the 80s, and as someone who was born in the 80s and grew up in the 90s, that was also appreciated. And that about covers it for me now. Pretty sure I couldn't say much more, especially about that last book. More or less gave it all away. Hopefully that's okay. Anyway, I'll be linking to my last Michael Cunningham author's backlist video down below. Since I made that video in 2022, Cunningham came out with his latest novel, Day, in 2023, which I've since read and reviewed, so I'll link to that review down below as well, and I'll link to the Goodreads pages for these 3 books, if you'd like more information on them. Meanwhile, in the present day, I think I was talking in my last video or recently about how all the snow was melting, and now we've had a brand new snowstorm. Not quite as bad as the last one where the snow staying around for a month, but it's, you know, dusted us over once again, and my work is opening a little bit late, but I still do have to go in, so I should be wrapping this up now. You should see me back on this channel in the next couple of days with my Would You Read It Challenge video, where I look back at old ballots of the BookTube Prize and consider the first pages of each book on the long lists for fiction. So stay tuned for that. And I hope all of you are having a good end of February. If you're in snowy weather, I hope you are staying warm. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.